Minority Leader Chuck Schumer having a pretty tough week, especially with the book rollout and everything, getting roughed up in a lot of places. Here's Democrat lawmaker Glenn Ivey at a town hall last night.
I'm afraid that it may be time for the Senate Democrats to pick new leadership as we move forward.
So that got a lot of support from the crowd, but later on, they let the congressman have it over what they see as the complete failure of the Democratic Party to challenge President Trump. Watch this.
We want you to show some of the backbone and strategic brilliance that Mitch McConnell would have in the minority.
Right.
We want you to show fight, and you are not fighting.
Answer his question. I'm going to answer his question. I'm going to answer his question. You're not going to get me upset.
The Democrats are descending into utter madness as President Trump continues to completely dismantle D.C. We're going to see how the legacy media is reluctantly but inevitably coming to the conclusion that Donald J. Trump hasn't just taken over the Republican Party, he's redefining the nation like no president has in nearly a century. And there is nothing, absolutely nothing, the Democrats and the political left can do to stop him. But first, gang, President Trump just signed an executive order outlining his plans to create America's first national sovereign wealth fund. And it will need to be filled up with assets and fast. Trump wants a go-live plan in the next 90 days. The Wall Street types are already focused on packing it with real estate, infrastructure, and pieces of trendy companies like TikTok. But let's not forget about gold. Sovereign wealth funds love to buy gold in bulk. Australia's been loading up. Saudi Arabia is buying the world's largest gold mine to supply itself. And even tiny Singapore recently added more than 100 metric tons of gold to its vaults. Can you imagine what could happen to the per ounce price of gold, which has already been surging sky high since Trump took office? I mean, if America's new sovereign wealth fund followed international best practices and made gold a part of its diversified portfolio, can you imagine? I mean, it would potentially make our country a brand new mega buyer in an already tight market. And when there's limited supply and huge demand, well, the impact on prices, let's just say you want to be ready. There's a simple way to get in on the action. It's all laid out for you in the free gold report from my partners at turleytalkslikesgold.com. You'll want to request your copy right away. After all, President Trump has put the world on notice. A new sovereign wealth fund for America may be coming perhaps in as little as the next 90 days. Take advantage of the time you've got to prepare. Get your free gold report now at turleytalkslikesgold.com. We have never seen anything like this. That is what the legacy media is openly admitting about President Trump. And it's true. We have actually never seen in our lifetimes a presidency quite like this. Case in point, yesterday, President Trump did what every single Republican president since Ronald Reagan in 1980 promised to do, but never delivered on. He abolished the Department of Education. And he did it, as you can see, with one stroke of his pen. Talk about a pen being mightier than the sword. That was it. That was all that was ever needed. Just like closing the border. All the debate during the Biden years, all that deliberation, that dysfunctionality, that back and forth Senate drama, the bipartisan bills in Congress that we were told by the legacy media and our politicians were absolutely necessary for Biden to act to secure the border. He's powerless. He can't do anything without congressional legislation. All of that, all of it was nothing more than kabuki theater. It was a lie. It's what's called virtual politics. It wasn't real. Within 48 hours of taking office, President Trump completely secured the border. And now attempted border crossings are their lowest level in decades. Now, this is why I would argue, and increasingly even the legacy media is arguing, this is why Trump has officially become the new permanent standard bearer of the new Patriot GOP, the grand old Patriot Party, as I like to call it. Ronald Reagan is officially taking a backseat to Trump from here on in. Reagan was wonderful in so many ways, but I hate to break it to the National Review types. Trump every day is exposing all of the opportunities that were always there for Reagan to dismantle the administrative state that he squandered. In many ways, Reagan, Bush Sr., Bush Jr., they all completely squandered their opportunity in the Oval Office, an opportunity ironically granted to them by the Constitution. Keep in mind, George W. Bush actually doubled the size of the Department of Education with No Child Left Behind. Why did it take 40 years to abolish an abomination to education if all it took was simply the stroke of a presidential pen? I mean, you all know the Department of Education always was a leftist institution from its very inception. It was established back in 1979 by Jimmy Carter as a gift, dare I say it, as a bribe to the teachers' unions to support him over Ted Kennedy, who was challenging him in the Democrat presidential primary that year. It was from its very inception a left-wing liberal institution. It was a leftist institution given by a leftist to leftists, but not just ideologically. No, it's worse than that. We now know that the Department of Education ultimately was actually nothing more than a money laundering operation. It was a slush fund created by leftists for leftists, giving left-wing activists and causes tens of millions of dollars. Here's a fun fact, but you may want to take your blood pressure medicine before you hear it. Since 1979, the Department of Education has raked in, get this, over $3 trillion. $3 trillion. And have test scores and aptitudes gone up? No, they've either flatlined or they plummeted. As school administrators got richer and more plentiful, students got dumber. As President Trump has repeatedly underscored, the department has overseen one of the most dramatic declines in test scores and academic standards ever witnessed in our nation's history. And yet its annual budget increased every single year. And this is so key as to why it's being abolished. The Department of Education has demonstrably done nothing, literally nothing, to improve education. Quite the contrary. The Education Department has been a net negative, actually contributing to the demise of educational standards, all the while we're pouring $3 trillion with a T, dollars into it. Not to mention that the Constitution gives the federal government absolutely no role whatsoever in education. So the Department of Education has been a net negative. It's only actually contributed to our school system's demise. It's only actually made that demise worse. And besides that, it's only enriched bureaucrats. It's a slush fund for Democrat activists and causes. And now it's officially buried. It's been abolished. And all it took was a simple stroke of the president's pen. That's it. And so this is the reason why more and more commentators are recognizing that Trump is, without equal, the new standard bearer of the new Republican Party. It's because he, unlike any of his predecessors, literally over the last century, he has restored to our nation a real constitutional presidency. You've got to get that. If you want to understand what's really happening in our nation today, this is it. For the first time in our lives, we are watching a president actually exercise his constitutionally granted executive authority to its fullest without the unconstitutional restraints of unelected bureaucrats impeding his power. We'll get to these rogue activist judges in a moment. Don't worry. We'll deal with them. But suffice it to say, the precise reason why we're seeing an unprecedented amount of judicial injunctions leveled at Trump, the likes of which we have never seen historically, is precisely because he's actually doing the job the Constitution expects the president to do. The Constitution actually grants the president extraordinary executive power in the form of executive orders. But of course, those orders are limited to the term the president serves in office. They can be just as easily reversed by the next president. But those powers are real while he sits in office. The president has extraordinary power to move the country very quickly, very rapidly, at neck-breaking speed in a particular direction. We saw this in its opposite form with bumbling Biden and his freaking auto pen. He effectively dismantled border security at breathtaking speed. He undid virtually everything Trump had done in his first 4 years within days of taking office. And then, of course, after breaking the country, Biden just basically left it at that. He spent the rest of his presidency taking naps on a Delaware beach. I know. I lived 20 minutes away from the guy, and they would shut down streets almost every single weekend because he came home to nap. Trump, by contrast, is reawakening the true executive power of the office as the defining hallmark of his presidency. His second term, he's already signed more executive orders than any previous president in their first 100 days ever. And he is radically remaking the federal government like never before in the process. So then what's Congress's role in all of this? If the president has this extraordinary power in his term, what's Congress's role? Well, simply put, if they want to make the president's executive orders permanent, they have to pass legislation codifying those orders into federal law. That's what the president's party is responsible for doing, while the opposition party seeks to limit the president's power by denying that permanent codification. That's the balance of powers. That's why we have midterms. That's why we have that swinging pendulum. You get this massive amount of power concentrated in the executive branch during a presidential year election. And then you have a chance in a mere 18 months to swing against that if you don't like where the president is taking the country. But up until this point, every single Republican and Democrat president, for the exception, or maybe I should say since FDR, who was really the last president to actually use his constitutionally mandated executive power, every single president has been hampered by the rise of the very administrative state and deep state that FDR put into place. And that administrative and deep state, that those unelected bureaucrats have tempered that executive power with the directives of an unelected bureaucracy. This is what made the raid on Trump's home in Mar-a-Lago so patently absurd. He was being raided for having classified documents in his home when he, as the chief executive, has ultimate decision-making authority on classification. It was a contradiction in terms. But the legacy media, because they hate him and because they hate you, the legacy media went along with that charade. That CIA operatives, that NSA bureaucrats, no, they're the ones who actually have the ultimate classification authority. Oh, and by the way, you can't vote for them. They're unelected. But we're the defenders of democracy. Every single day, literally every single hour of every single day. Trump is taking that authority back. The reason why Trump is the new standard bearer of the party is because he is the first president in our lifetimes to govern in accordance with his constitutionally mandated executive power. And he's demonstrating what this country is capable of when we follow the powers granted by the Constitution, when we dismantle by executive order the administrative and deep state, when we tell activist judges to go shove it until the Supreme Court makes its decision, when the president's party in power enacts his vision through legislation to make his executive orders permanent. This is how the United States of America is constitutionally supposed to be governed. And it's glorious. It's the wonder of the world. And that's why 80% of the country that supports all the measures that Trump is doing, from border security to economic security to reversing wokeness and the like, this is why they're so happy with him. It is absolutely glorious. But for the Democrats and the pathetic fringe 20% of our country who actually want wide open borders and illegal immigration gang members to walk our streets and unimpeded, and men competing in women's sports, for that 20%, miserable 20%, what Trump is doing is beyond anything they can actually comprehend. They never imagined this. They knew he was going to be bad, but they just expected, like a George W. Bush on steroids or something like that, or Trump's first term, where he's constantly hampered by investigations and by Paul, Eddie Munster, Ryan, and all that. They were expecting maybe a little bit better than that. They weren't expecting anything like this. Trump is literally destroying the federal system that the woke left spent the last 8 decades building. And as a result, the woke left is literally descending into madness. By the way, click on the link in the description below to get all these articles and tweets I reference throughout my videos emailed to you each and every day. You're going to love it. We want you to have the best resources out there to convince your family and your friends of this new MAGA super age that's rising here.